In a faraway galaxy there was an empire made of shining cities and tall towers. But even inside all that beauty there was one secret that no one liked to speak about. People whispered about a princess, a daughter of the emperor, who was unlike anyone else. She was born blind. Her eyes never opened to the stars that her people loved so much. In a world where sight was power and beauty was strength, this made her different, and because she was different, people began to fear her. The priests of the empire looked at her and said she was touched by fate. They warned that her blindness was not natural. They claimed it was a curse. They told the emperor that his daughter carried a prophecy. The prophecy said that anyone who dared to approach her, anyone who dared to touch her hand, would bring doom upon the empire. Because of this, she was hidden away, locked inside a palace made of crystal and stone. The palace stood high on a mountain. With guards around it day and night, no one was allowed to enter. No one was allowed to even look upon her face. The people called her the blind princess, and to them she was both mystery and terror. Years passed, and the rumors only grew stronger. Some said that she could hear voices from the stars. Others claimed that she could walk in dreams and see the hearts of men. But no one knew the truth because no one dared go close. The blind princess herself sat alone in her chamber. She never saw the sun, she never saw the stars, but she could feel the cold walls around her. She could hear the echo of her own voice when she sang to herself at night. The silence was her only friend. The fear of others was her only companion. Outside the palace, in the great markets of the empire, traders and travelers spoke of her with hushed voices. Children dared each other to whisper her name, and always the story ended the same. Anyone who goes near her will not return. Anyone who touches her will die. It was in this empire that a human traveler arrived. His ship came from the edge of known space. He was not a noble, not a warrior, not a priest. He was simply a man with curious eyes and a restless spirit. He had heard the rumors while traveling through distant starports, and unlike the others, he did not laugh them away. He did not fear them. Instead, he wanted to know the truth. When he first walked through the alien streets, people stared at him. Humans were rare in that part of the galaxy. He asked about the blind princess, and every time he asked, the aliens looked away. They warned him with trembling voices. They told him that even speaking of her was dangerous, but the human only listened and wondered more. He stood one night beneath the mountain palace, the crystal walls shining under the moonlight. Guards walked the path with sharp weapons, and still the human gazed up without fear. He thought of the princess inside, a girl who had never seen the stars above her. He thought of her loneliness. He thought of how strange it was that everyone feared someone who had never harmed them. The guards saw him looking. One of them warned him, "Do not climb, human. Many have tried, none have returned." The guard's eyes were hard, but his voice carried fear, not of the human, but of what lived inside the palace. The human smiled softly. "Then perhaps it is time someone did return," he said. His words shocking the guards. Whispers spread in the empire the next morning. Whispers of a foolish human who dared to think of entering the forbidden palace. Nobles shook their heads, priests warned of doom, and the emperor himself frowned upon the thought. But still the human walked the roads that led higher and higher toward the crystal walls. Inside her chamber, the blind princess sat with her head lifted. She felt something in the air, a presence she had never known before. The sound of footsteps climbing closer, she whispered to herself, "Someone is coming." And though she could not see, a small smile touched her lips, a smile that had not been there in many years. The palace guards tensed as the human drew near. They shouted warnings, they lifted their weapons, but still he walked one step after another, until the gates of crystal loomed before him. The rumors had said no one dared to approach. The priests had said anyone who tried would bring destruction, but the human did not turn away. His voice was calm. "I do not fear her, I do not fear your prophecy. I only want to speak with her." The guards froze, torn between their orders and their fear. The empire held its breath, and the blind princess waited in the shadows of her lonely hall, and so, the moment that had never come in all the years of the empire was about to begin. One human, one step, one chance to break the chains of rumor and fear. The air grew heavy. The guards whispered that doom was near. The priests prayed that the prophecy would not awaken, and the human lifted his hand to knock upon the crystal gates. The blind princess, sitting in darkness, whispered softly. At last, as if she had been waiting for him all her life, the crystal gates opened with a sound like thunder. Yet inside the palace all was silent. The human stepped forward, and the guards, though armed and trained, took a step back. None of them dared follow him into the forbidden halls. The air inside was cool and heavy, filled with the scent of old stone and glowing crystals. The walls shimmered faintly with soft light, but the deeper he walked, the darker it became. Every step echoed, as if the palace itself was warning him to turn back. Far above, in her hidden chamber, the blind princess sat still, her pale hands resting on her knees. She tilted her head slightly, for though her eyes could not see, her senses reached far. She felt the air shift. She felt the rhythm of a heartbeat that was not her own. Someone was coming closer, someone who should not be here. The human's footsteps slowed as he reached the end of a great corridor. There, through tall carved doors, he saw her sitting alone on a silver seat, her long hair falling like a river of night, her eyes closed but her face calm. He had expected anger, or perhaps a cursed figure wrapped in chains, but instead he saw someone who looked peaceful, lonely, and strangely gentle. The blind princess lifted her head, her lips parted slightly, and her voice, soft and clear, flowed into the room. "Who dares step closer?" she asked. Though she already knew the answer, the human swallowed, his voice steady. "I am a traveler. I come from far away." "I mean you no harm." The princess tilted her head again, her sightless eyes turned toward him. Though she could not see him, she felt the warmth of his presence. "Do you not know the curse?" she whispered. "Do you not fear what the others fear?" He stepped closer, ignoring the warnings that had filled his ears since he landed on her world. "I know the stories," he said, "but I do not believe them. I believe you are more than the curse they speak of." For the first time in many years, the princess let out a small laugh. It was not loud, not mocking. It was a fragile sound, like a bell in the wind. "You are either brave or foolish," she said. "Perhaps both." The human smiled gently. "Perhaps," he replied, "but I am also curious. I wanted to see if the stories were true. I wanted to meet you, not the ghost they speak of." The blind princess lowered her head, her voice softer now. "No one has ever spoken to me like this. They fear me. They whisper about me, but no one comes close. Not even my own father." Her hands trembled slightly as she spoke. "Why are you here truly?" He paused, thinking carefully before answering. "Because I think you are more than what they say. Because I think loneliness is a crueler curse than blindness. And I wanted you to know someone does not fear you." Her heart raced at his words. For though she had never seen a sunrise, never seen the color of the stars, she felt something in his tone that painted pictures brighter than light. Far below, the guards trembled. Priests chanted warnings, and messengers rushed to the emperor with news that the human had entered the forbidden hall. The empire's heart beat faster, expecting thunder, fire, or destruction, but nothing came, only silence. Inside, the princess rose slowly from her silver seat. Her hands brushed the cold stone beside her as she stood. She faced the direction of the human, her blind eyes unblinking. "Come closer, then." "If you do not fear me," she said, her voice carrying both challenge and hope. The human hesitated for a moment, then took a step, then another, until he stood only a few feet from her. The room seemed to tighten around them. The glowing crystals dimmed as if watching, and the silence grew heavier. He looked into her face, though her eyes were closed. He saw no monster, no curse, only a girl who had been left alone for far too long. "I am here," he said quietly, "and I am not leaving." Her lips parted slightly. Her hands reached out into the empty air, searching, trembling, but stopping just short of touching him. "They said my touch would bring ruin," she whispered, "that if anyone stood this close, the empire would fall. And yet," the human said, his voice calm, "I am still here." Her breath caught. Her chest rose and fell quickly. In that moment, the weight of years of silence pressed against her heart. Someone stood before her without fear. Someone dared speak to her without trembling. Far outside, the emperor's throne hall shook with anger as the priest screamed, "The prophecy awakens. The doom is near." Yet no fire came, no storm fell. The only sound was the beating of two hearts in the crystal chamber. The blind princess lowered her hand slowly, her lips curving into the faintest smile. "Perhaps," she said softly, "perhaps the prophecy is wrong." The human stepped even closer, the space between them so small now that a single breath could bridge it. The palace itself seemed to wait, as though the walls, the crystals, the air, all leaned forward to see what would happen next. And then, as the moonlight touched the crystal walls from outside, the human whispered, "I will come again," and with those words, he turned and walked back through the great doors. His footsteps echoing with calm defiance, the princess stood frozen, her blind eyes glistening with tears she could not see, but could feel for the first time in her life. She had been seen, not with eyes, but with courage, not with fear, but with kindness. And in the silence that followed, she whispered into the darkness, "Come again, human. Please come again." The human returned the next night. As the moon rose high and the crystals on the palace walls glowed like cold fire, the guards watched him with wide eyes, whispering to each other that he was already a dead man walking, yet none dared stop him, for they feared what the princess herself might do if they tried. Inside her chamber, the blind princess waited, her hands folded in her lap, her ears sharp to every sound. When she heard his footsteps echo through the empty hall, her lips curved into a small smile. "You came back," she whispered, her voice carrying both relief and disbelief. "I said I would," the human replied, stepping closer, his tone calm and gentle. "And I keep my word." She tilted her head, her sightless eyes searching for him. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why risk yourself for someone you do not know? For someone cursed by prophecy?" The human lowered himself to sit upon the stone floor across from her. "Because I do not believe you are cursed," he said. "I believe you are lonely, and I cannot walk away from that." Her heart trembled at his words. She had heard pity before. She had heard fear, but never such honesty. She turned her face slightly as if trying to hide the soft tears that slipped down her cheeks. "Lonely," she repeated, her voice breaking. "Yes, I am." The human began to talk, his voice filling the chamber with life. He told her about the stars he had seen, burning like endless fires in the black sky. He told her of oceans on distant worlds, waves that roared and whispered at the same time. He described the blue skies of his home, the green fields, the sound of rain against windows. The princess listened in silence, her closed eyes glowing faintly in the dim crystal light. Though she had never seen these things, she could imagine them through his words, colors painted in her mind where darkness had always been. She asked questions, small at first, then many. What is the color of rain? What does the sun feel like on your skin? What does laughter sound like when many people share it? Each time he answered with care, giving her worlds she had never known. For the first time in years, the blind princess laughed, a soft and musical laugh that startled even herself. She covered her lips with her hand as if she had done something forbidden, but the human smiled. "That sound," he said, "is worth every step I took to reach this place." The bond between them grew. Night after night he returned. The guards muttered but never stopped him. The people whispered of doom but still waited. Nothing happened. No destruction fell. Instead, inside the crystal palace, the human and the princess spoke as if they had known each other forever. She revealed her pain, how her father had locked her away, how priests called her the shadow of death, how even her own people would not look upon her face. "I am alive," she whispered one night. "But I have never been allowed to live." The human listened, his fists tightening, anger burning in him for her suffering. "Then let me remind you," he said, "that you are alive, that you have a voice, that you are more than what they say." Her lips trembled. She had never heard such words, not from anyone. She reached out her hand slowly, but stopped just short of touching him. The old fear chained her. The prophecy whispered in her mind. "If I touch you," she whispered, "they say the empire will fall. And if you do not," the human said softly, "you will remain alone forever." Her hand lowered, trembling, unable to take the step, yet inside her heart a fire began to stir. Small but growing, far away in the temple halls, the priests felt the air shift. They dreamed uneasy dreams, visions of light and shadow clashing. They awoke with fear, crying that the prophecy was stirring. They rushed to the emperor with warnings. The human must be removed. The princess must not speak with him again. The emperor's face grew dark. Though he loved his daughter in his own silent way, he feared the curse more. He ordered the guards to watch closely, to be ready. Yet still none dared enter the chamber where human and princess spoke. Their fear was stronger than their loyalty. Back in the palace chamber, the blind princess lifted her face. "Do you not fear death?" she asked him. "Do you not fear what may come?" He smiled gently, shaking his head. "No," he said, "because I have already found something worth dying for. A truth greater than fear. You are not a curse, you are a person, and you deserve to be free." Her chest rose sharply at his words, her blind eyes glistening as she whispered, "Free." The word felt heavy and strange on her tongue, like something she had always longed for but never dared to speak aloud. The nights passed and their bond grew stronger, each word weaving a thread, each laugh a spark, each silence a promise. Yet outside the palace, unrest began to stir. The people muttered that the prophecy was awakening. The priests demanded action. The emperor's patience thinned. And still, inside her lonely chamber, the princess found herself no longer alone. The darkness around her no longer felt endless, for within it she now carried the sound of his voice, the warmth of his courage, and the first fragile pieces of hope. But as hope grew in her heart, fear grew in the empire, and soon the bond they had built in shadows would be tested by the weight of an ancient prophecy. The whispers of the empire grew louder with every passing night. The people feared the prophecy. The priests declared that the end of their world was near, and finally, the news reached the emperor himself. The emperor was a man of steel and shadow, his face carved by age and worry. He had ruled through war and peace, through storms and silence, but nothing unsettled him more than the words of the prophecy, when the priest stood before him, trembling, and told him that a human had entered the palace of the blind princess. His heart froze. "Impossible," the emperor thundered, rising from his throne of stone and gold. "No one dares set foot in that place." The head priest bowed low, his voice breaking. "He not only entered, my emperor, he speaks with her. He returns night after night, the curse awakens. The empire is in danger." The emperor clenched his fists. The memory of his daughter flashed in his mind. He had kept her hidden not out of cruelty but out of fear. Fear of losing his empire. Fear of the prophecy becoming true. "A human," he muttered darkly. "It had to be an outsider." That night he summoned his war council. Generals and lords filled the great hall, their armor shining, their eyes sharp. The emperor's voice echoed across the chamber. "The prophecy warns that if anyone touches the princess, destruction will fall upon us. This human must be stopped. He must be removed." The generals agreed, voices rising in anger. Some demanded the human's execution at once. Others warned that even killing him might stir the curse further. Only one old general spoke softly. "What if the prophecy has been misunderstood? What if the girl is not cursed?" But something else. But his words were drowned out by the cries of fear. Meanwhile, inside the crystal palace, the blind princess sat with her human friend, her heart lighter than ever before. She laughed quietly at his stories of stars and oceans. She listened to the way he spoke of freedom and life. But deep inside, she felt the change in the air. A storm was gathering. "You should not come again," she whispered one night, her voice trembling. "They are watching. They will not allow this to continue." The human shook his head, his eyes steady. "I told you I'm not leaving you. Let them watch, let them whisper. It does not matter." Her lips trembled. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to hold on to this fragile bond. But fear pressed against her chest. "They will punish you, they will punish me, they will not forgive." The human leaned closer, his voice firm. "Then let them try, I will not walk away. Not now." And though his words gave her strength, the shadows of fear still clung to her heart. Outside, riots began to stir in the streets. People shouted in fear that the prophecy was awakening. Some demanded the human's exile. Others demanded the princess be silenced forever. The empire trembled on the edge of chaos. The emperor could wait no longer. He gave the order, "Bring the human before me. Let him stand trial for his arrogance, and let the empire see that I will protect them." The guards saluted and rushed to obey, though fear lined their faces that night. When the human entered the crystal hall to see the princess, the doors burst open. Dozens of guards stormed in, their spears raised. The princess cried out in terror, "No, do not harm him." Her voice breaking for the first time in years. The human stood tall, refusing to resist, though chains were fastened around his wrists, though weapons pressed against his back. His eyes never left the princess. "Do not fear," he whispered to her as the guards dragged him away. Her blind eyes filled with tears. Her hands trembled as she reached toward the sound of his fading footsteps. "No," she cried again, her voice echoing through the crystal palace, startling the guards, startling even herself, for never before had she shouted so openly. The empire was shaken by the news. The blind princess had cried, the human was captured, and the prophecy seemed closer than ever to awakening. Priests fell to their knees in terror. The people filled the streets with chants of fear. In the great throne hall, the human was thrown to his knees before the emperor, chains rattling, torches flickering. The emperor looked down at him with cold eyes. "You dare break the oldest law of this empire. You dare approach the cursed one. You dare defy the will of the gods." The human lifted his head, his voice steady despite the chains. "I dared because she is not cursed. She is not a monster. She is your daughter, and she deserves more than a prison. Gasps filled the hall. Nobles and generals stared in shock. No one had ever spoken of the princess in such a way. No one had ever defended her before the throne. The emperor's face darkened, anger blazing, yet in his heart a flicker of doubt stirred. The words of the old general, the laughter of his daughter when she was young, the truth he had buried beneath fear. But fear was stronger still. "Enough," he thundered. "The human will be punished and the curse will be contained." The blind princess sat in her chamber, her hands clenched, her tears falling for the first time in her life. She had felt hope, and now it was slipping away, taken from her by the fear of prophecy and the cruelty of fate. But deep inside her chest something else awakened. A fire that had never burned before. A defiance that whispered, "I will not let them take him. I will not remain silent." And far below in the emperor's hall, the human raised his chained hands, his eyes steady, ready to face whatever punishment awaited him. For he knew he had already changed something that could not be undone. The throne hall was filled with silence. Hundreds of eyes stared at the chained human who knelt before the emperor. The priests stood in a circle, chanting prayers to ward off the curse. The nobles whispered behind their jeweled masks, and the guards kept their weapons ready. Fear and anger filled the air like smoke. The emperor's voice rang out, deep and cold. "You have broken the sacred law. You dared to step into the palace of the blind princess. You dared to defy the prophecy. For this crime you must beg for mercy, or you will be executed before all." The human lifted his head, his chains clinking as he rose slowly to his feet. Though beaten and surrounded, his eyes burned with calm fire. "I will not beg," he said firmly, his voice echoing through the chamber. "Because I have done no crime." Gasps spread through the hall. The priests shouted, "Blasphemy!" The nobles hissed in shock. The guards tightened their grip on their spears. But the human stood unshaken. "You call her cursed," he continued, his voice steady. "You call her doom. You call her a shadow. But I have spoken with her. I have heard her laughter. I have seen her heart. She is not a curse. She is your daughter, and she deserves freedom." The emperor's jaw tightened. Anger flared in his eyes. "Silence, human. You know nothing of the prophecy. You know nothing of the danger she carries." But the human did not stop. His voice grew louder. "The only danger she carries is the cruelty of your fear. The prophecy is nothing but chains you place upon her. You have hidden her, locked her away, made her live in darkness, but she is alive, she is strong, and she is more than your fear will ever allow her to be." The hall shook with the weight of his words. Some nobles turned pale, some lowered their heads. Even the guards shifted uneasily, for the truth in his voice struck something deep, something they had buried for too long. Far away in her chamber, the blind princess felt the echo of his words, though walls and distance separated them. Her heart burned as if his fire had reached her. She pressed her hands to her chest, whispering, "He speaks for me." The head priest raised his staff, his voice trembling with fury. "This human is dangerous, his tongue is poison. He must be silenced before the prophecy takes shape." But before the emperor could give the order, a guard stepped forward, his face pale, his voice uncertain. "My emperor, forgive me, but what if he speaks truth? What if we have misunderstood the prophecy all this time?" The hall erupted in chaos. Priests shouting, nobles arguing, guards murmuring in confusion. The emperor slammed his hand upon the throne. "Enough," he roared. "The prophecy is clear, the girl is cursed, and this human feeds the fire of destruction. Take him away." The guards moved forward, but the human lifted his chained hands and spoke once more, his voice calm but cutting through the noise. "You call yourselves rulers of stars, but you cannot face the truth of a single girl. You hide her, you fear her, but you never once dared ask what she feels. What she wants, you say you protect the empire, but all you have done is imprison your own daughter." The emperor froze. The word struck deep into his heart. He remembered her small hands as a child, her laughter before the priest declared her cursed. He had buried those memories under fear, but the human's words tore them open again. Before the emperor could answer, a cry echoed through the hall. The blind princess had left her chamber. Guided by the sound of his voice, she appeared at the doorway, her steps unsteady but determined. The entire hall gasped as she entered, her blind eyes glowing faintly in the crystal light. "Father," she whispered, her voice carrying across the chamber. "Do not harm him." The emperor's face hardened. "You should not be here," he said. But his voice wavered. She walked slowly forward, her hand brushing the walls for guidance. The crowd stepped back in awe. None had seen her in many years. "He's not poison," she said firmly. "He is the first to see me, not the curse, not the prophecy, but me." The hall grew silent. Every noble, every priest, every guard stared in shock. The princess's voice, long hidden, now rang with strength. The emperor gripped the arms of his throne. Torn between fear and love, the priest shouted for him to act, to silence both the princess and the human. But the people's eyes were changing. Whispers began to rise. Whispers of doubt, whispers of truth. The human turned toward the princess, his voice soft but steady. "I told you I would not leave you." Her blind eyes glistened, and for the first time she smiled in front of her people. A small, fragile smile, but one that carried more power than the priest's chants or the emperor's commands. The emperor stood, his voice thundering again. "Enough if you believe so strongly. Then prove it. Stand before her and let the prophecy decide. If you touch her hand and no doom falls, then perhaps you speak truth, but if the prophecy is real, then you will both destroy us all." Gasps filled the chamber. The priests cried out in horror. The nobles clutched their robes. The guards froze, and the blind princess trembled, for the test that had haunted her entire life was now before her. The human raised his chained hand slowly, his eyes locked on hers. "Then let the truth be known," he said calmly. The emperor's voice rang like iron. "Bring him to her chamber, and let the prophecy judge." The guards dragged the human forward. Chains clattering, the priests wailed. The people outside the hall began to gather in fear, for they knew the moment of destiny had come. And in the silence that followed, the blind princess whispered to herself, her voice barely a breath, "Do not fear, human. I will stand with you." The great chamber was silent as the human was led in chains to the blind princess. The priests circled the room, whispering prayers. The nobles sat frozen, their jeweled masks hiding fear, and the emperor stood tall, his voice hard though his eyes betrayed doubt. The guards pushed the human forward. The sound of his footsteps echoed against the crystal walls. The blind princess stood at the center, her pale hands trembling at her sides. Though her blind eyes could not see him, her heart knew he was near. "Do you understand what will happen if you take her hand?" the emperor thundered, his words heavy with warning. "The prophecy declares doom. Our empire will fall. Are you willing to risk not only your life, but the lives of millions?" The human raised his head, his voice calm. "Yes," he said, "because I believe the prophecy is a lie, and even if it is not, I would rather risk everything than leave her in chains of fear." A murmur swept through the hall. The priests cried out, "Blasphemy!" The nobles gasped in shock, but the blind princess felt her chest tighten. His words pierced her heart. No one had ever chosen her over fear before. The emperor's hand clenched. "Then let it be done," he said coldly. "Touch her hand, and let fate decide." The guards released the chains and stepped back quickly, as if afraid the curse would strike them too. The human stood free though bruised, his eyes locked on the princess. She stood trembling, her lips parted, her hands uncertain in the air. He stepped forward, each pace slow, each echo loud in the silent chamber. When he reached her, he knelt down and whispered, "I am not afraid." Her breath caught. Her hands trembled. She whispered back, "But I am." Her voice cracked. "All my life I was told my touch would destroy. I was told I was death." The human reached out slowly, his fingers hovering just above hers. "And all your life they were wrong," he said softly. "Let us prove it together." Her lips trembled. Her hands shook, but then, with all the strength she had left, she lifted her hand and placed it gently into his. The moment their skin touched, the chamber erupted in light. A wave of glowing energy surged through the air. The crystal walls blazed like stars. The floor shook as though the world itself was awakening. The priests screamed, the nobles cried out, the guards shielded their faces. But no destruction came, no fire, no storm, no death. Instead, a warmth spread through the room. A warmth that wrapped the princess and the human in a glow of silver and gold. The blind princess gasped. For the first time in her life, she saw not with her eyes but with her heart and mind. She saw the stars blazing in her thoughts. She saw colors she had only heard described. She saw the face of the human before her, not with sight but with something deeper. Tears streamed down her cheeks. "I see," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I see you." The human squeezed her hand gently, his own eyes glistening. "And I see you," he said softly. "Not cursed, not doomed, only you." The emperor staggered back, his face pale. The priests fell to their knees, wailing in confusion. "This is not the prophecy," they cried. This cannot be, the nobles whispered, fear turning into awe, for instead of ruin, they saw light instead of death. They saw life blooming in their cursed princess. The princess raised her head, her blind eyes glowing with a new fire. Her voice steady for the first time. I am not a curse, she declared. I am not death. I am the future you were too afraid to see. Her words echoed like thunder. The energy around her swirled and then softened, fading into calm light. The human still holding her hand as though it was the most natural thing in the world. The emperor's lips trembled, his heart torn between fear and love. Daughter, he whispered, his voice breaking for the first time in many years. What are you? The princess turned toward him, her hand still in the human's. I am your child, she said firmly. I am your blood. I am your heir, and I will no longer be hidden in shadows. The priests tried to rise, tried to shout again of doom, but the people outside the hall had already gathered. They had seen the light burst from the palace. They had felt the shaking earth, and they whispered among themselves. Not of fear, but of hope. The human stood tall beside her, his voice calm but strong. The prophecy was never about doom. It was about this moment. It was about her awakening. You feared her because you never tried to understand her. But now the truth is clear. The emperor fell silent, staring at the two figures bathed in fading light. His power shaken, his certainty broken, for in front of all, the curse was undone, the lie exposed, and the truth too powerful to deny, but still, his pride and his fear battled within him. His generals looked to him for orders. His priests begged him to act. The people waited for his voice. The chamber held its breath, the fate of the empire trembling in the space between silence and command. And in that silence, the blind princess squeezed the human's hand tighter, her blind eyes glowing softly, her voice calm. I will not go back into the shadows, not now. Not ever. The emperor's face hardened. His hands clenched and he roared, Enough! If you defy me, then you defy the empire, and I will not allow one human to bring us to ruin. The chamber erupted again in noise. The guards raised their weapons, the priests screamed, and the nobles watched in terror. But the human and the princess did not let go of each other's hand. They stood together unshaken as the storm of power and fear rose around them. The crystal chamber shook with voices. Guards shouted, priests wailed, nobles whispered in fear, and the emperor roared with fury. Yet in the center of the storm stood the blind princess and the human. Their hands joined, their hearts steady. The emperor raised his arm. His voice thundered like iron. Seize them both, before the curse spreads. But though his command was loud, the guards hesitated. Their weapons trembled in their hands. They had seen the light. They had felt the warmth. They had watched the prophecy fail. The priests screamed louder. Destroy the human, bind the girl. The gods demand it. But their voices cracked, their authority broken. The people outside the palace walls had already seen the truth. The whispers of hope spread faster than fear. The blind princess lifted her head, her blind eyes glowing softly, her voice calm yet sharp. I am not a curse, she declared. I am not death, I am your princess, and I will no longer be silent. Her words echoed across the chamber, across the palace, across the empire. The people outside fell to their knees, not in fear, but in awe. For the first time they had heard her voice, not as a shadow, but as their own blood. The emperor's face hardened, but doubt carved deep lines into his expression. He shouted again, but fewer obeyed. The people's loyalty was shifting. The chains of fear that had bound them for years were breaking. The human stood beside her, his hand firm in hers, his voice strong. You can no longer hide her. You can no longer bury her behind lies. She is not doom. She is your future. The old general, who had once spoken softly against the priests, now stepped forward, his armor gleaming, his voice loud. The human speaks truth. The princess is not our curse. She is our light. The hall shook with murmurs. More voices rose in agreement. Guards lowered their weapons, nobles stepped back. The power of the priest cracked like thin glass. The emperor staggered, his eyes wide. No, he whispered. I built this empire on the prophecy. I sacrificed my daughter to protect us all. Do not take this from me. The princess turned toward him, her voice steady, though tears glistened on her cheeks. You did not protect us. Father, you only chained us. You let fear rule. But I will not let fear rule any longer. The human squeezed her hand, whispering softly, Stand tall, they are listening now. She lifted her chin, her voice rising. I am your princess. I am your heir. I was blind, but in darkness I found truth. I was silent, But in silence I found strength, and now I will lead not through fear, but through hope. The chamber erupted, the people outside cheered. The guards dropped their spears, the nobles fell silent, and the priest collapsed in defeat, their words powerless. The emperor's knees buckled, the weight of years of fear crushing him. He looked at his daughter, truly looked, and for the first time in his life he saw not a curse, not a prophecy, but the child he had abandoned. Tears filled his old eyes. "Forgive me," he whispered, broken. "I was afraid." The blind princess stepped forward, her hand still joined with the humans. "Fear has ruled long enough," she said gently. "Now it is time for something greater." The people cheered louder, their voices rising like a tide. "Princess, princess," they cried. Their fear washed away, their hearts lit with new hope. The human turned to her, his voice quiet amidst the roar. "They are yours now." She shook her head softly, smiling faintly. "No," she whispered, "they are ours." Together, in that moment, the empire changed, the curse was broken, the prophecy undone. The blind princess, once locked in shadows, now stood as a beacon, her human companion at her side. From that day forward, the stories spread across the stars. Travelers whispered of the blind princess who was feared by all, until a human dared to approach. They spoke of how she touched his hand and brought light instead of doom. They spoke of how the human's courage and the princess's heart had changed the fate of a world. No longer hidden, the princess walked among her people. She touched their hands without fear, and instead of death, she gave them hope. Instead of silence, she gave them her voice. Her blindness was no curse, it was her gift. For she did not see the way others saw. She saw deeper into the hearts of those around her. The human remained by her side, not as a conqueror, not as a savior, but as a friend, a partner, a voice that reminded her she was never alone. Together they built bridges between worlds, between species, between hearts, and in the quiet moments when the stars shone high above, she would smile softly and whisper, "I once lived in darkness, but then you came, and I saw the universe through you." And he would answer, holding her hand, "And I once walked among the stars, but I did not truly see them until I saw you." Thus ended the age of fear, and thus began the age of hope. For the galaxy would forever remember the blind princess and the human who dared to touch her hand, not as a story of doom, but as a story of love, courage, and destiny rewritten.